In the desolate, humpbacked hills of north-central Massachusetts, where the Miskatonic River winds its sluggish way through valleys of ancient rotting foliage, and gambrel-roofed farmhouses lean at precarious, unholy angles, there exists a blight upon the earth, known as Dunwich. It is a region of singular brooding morbidity, where the very atmosphere seems saturated with an antediluvian malevolence that defies the rational dictates of modern science. Here, amidst the crumbling stone walls and the rank, over-tall grasses that whisper of secrets better left interred, the Whateley lineage had long festered in a state of degenerate decay. Yet it was not until the twilight years of the patriarch known as Old Wizard Whateley that this decay took on a form of cosmic, blasphemous proportions. The chronicle of those dark years, leading unto the horrific rites upon Sentinel Hill, is a testament to the fragility of the human soul when confronted by the cyclopean shadows of the outer voids. Old Whateley was a man of singular and repellent aspect, a tall, gaunt figure whose skin possessed the texture of parchment and whose eyes burned with a fevered, unnatural luminescence. He was a practitioner of those forbidden arts which the world has wisely chosen to forget, a seeker of the hidden keys that might unlock the gates between the dimensions of our perceived reality and the howling chaos that lies beyond. His mind, warped by generations of inbreeding and the study of mouldering worm-eaten scrolls, was fixed upon a singular, monstrous ambition. He sought to bridge the gulf between the terrestrial and the infinite, to invite into this mundane sphere a presence so vast and so terrible that its very name is a shriek in the dark. Yog-Sothoth, the lurker at the threshold, he who is the gate and the key. To achieve this end, the wizard required more than mere incantations. He required a vessel, a living conduit through which the essence of the outside might find purchase in the world of men. For this purpose he looked upon his own daughter Lavinia. To the casual observer, if such a soul dared to traverse the briar-choked paths to the Whateley farm, Lavinia was a creature of pitiable deformity. An albino of singular pallor, she moved with a hesitant, furtive grace, her pinkish eyes reflecting a soul that had known little but the isolation of the hills and the mockery of the village folk who dwelt in the valley below. Yet the wizard did not view her with the eyes of a father. To him, she was the essential ingredient in a grand alchemical experiment, a tabula rasa upon which the sigils of the elder gods might be inscribed. The years of preparation were marked by a series of events that sent ripples of unease through the superstitious inhabitants of Dunwich. There were reports of strange lights flickering upon the crest of Sentinel Hill, of rhythmic drummings that seemed to emanate from the very bowels of the earth, and of the inexplicable disappearance of certain rare and ancient volumes from the more secluded libraries of New England. It is whispered that the wizard, through means both subtle and nefarious, had secured fragments of the dreaded Necronomicon of the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred, as well as the blasphemous Book of Ibon and the Pnakotic manuscripts. These texts, bound in the tanned hides of creatures unknown to biology, provided the blueprint for the construction of the stone circles that would eventually crown the heights of the hill. The physical labor involved in the raising of these monoliths was a feat that defied the meager strength of an old man and a frail girl. Yet those who chanced to look toward the heights on certain moonless nights swore they saw silhouettes that were not human aiding in the task, shadowy, amorphous forms that moved with a heavy gelatinous purpose. The stones themselves were of a peculiar non-Euclidean geometry, hewn from the dark igneous rock of the surrounding hills, but imbued with a weight and a texture that suggested they had been dragged from the lightless pits of the underworld. As the circle neared completion, the very flora of Sentinel Hill began to change. The trees grew stunted and twisted into agonized shapes, and the whippoorwills, those harbingers of departing souls, began to congregate in numbers that defied all natural laws, their incessant chanting a discordant chorus to the wizard's silent prayers. Throughout this period, the manipulation of Lavinia Whateley proceeded with a cold, calculated cruelty. The wizard did not merely command her. He wove a tapestry of lies and half-truths that preyed upon her loneliness and her desire for transcendence. He spoke to her of the old ones who had once ruled the earth and who would soon return to sweep away the filth and poverty of their current existence. He portrayed Yog-Sothoth not as a nameless horror, but as a celestial saviour, a being of pure light and infinite knowledge who would elevate Lavinia from her wretched state and grant her a throne among the stars. To a woman who had been spat upon by the villagers of Dunwich, who had known only the biting cold of the winters and the suffocating heat of the summers in a rotting farmhouse, this promise of cosmic divinity was a potent poison. She began to view her impending role not with dread, but with a fanatical, ecstatic devotion, believing herself to be the chosen bride of a god. As the celestial alignments drew near, specifically the conjunction of certain stars that had not occupied such positions since the sinking of Atlantis, the atmosphere in Dunwich grew thick with a palpable tension. The cattle in the fields grew restless, lowing with a piteous terror, and the dogs of the village howled incessantly at the moon. The wizard Whateley, his preparations complete, began the final series of rites. These were not the simple charms of a village sorcerer, but the profound, reality-warping evocations of a master of the black arts. He spent days in the cellar of his farmhouse, where the air was heavy with the scent of ozone and something more ancient, something that smelled of the salt spray of primordial oceans and the dust of dead nebulae. On the night of the vernal equinox, the climax of the wizard's long labour arrived. The sky over Dunwich was a bruised purple, streaked with clouds that seemed to take on the shapes of grasping claws. Lavinia, dressed in robes of a shimmering iridescent fabric that her father had produced from a hidden chest, was led up the winding path to the summit of Sentinel Hill. Her face, in the pale light of the waning moon, was a mask of expectant fervour, her albino features luminous with an unholy inner light. The wizard followed, his voice already beginning the low, guttural chant that would thin the veil between the worlds. The rite itself was a phantasmagoria of sights and sounds that would have shattered the mind of any sane witness. As the wizard reached the centre of the stone circle, he raised his arms toward the zenith, and the air around him began to shimmer and distort. The chanting grew in volume, a cacophony of syllables that seemed to grate against the very fabric of space. Yainganga, Yog-Sothoth Hilgeb, Fthag Nagai, Nagaga. The ground beneath their feet began to vibrate, a deep, rhythmic thrumming that matched the beating of a monstrous heart. Suddenly, a column of lambent violet light erupted from the centre of the altar stone, piercing the heavens and illuminating the valley for miles around. In that moment, the lurker at the threshold made his presence known. There was no physical form that the human eye could fully comprehend. Rather, there was a sense of an immense burgeoning pressure, a confluence of spheres within spheres, an overlapping of dimensions that defied all terrestrial logic. To Lavinia, the experience was one of overwhelming, agonizing ecstasy. She felt herself being unmade and remade, her very atoms dancing to the tune of a cosmic piper. The wizard stood by, his face contorted in a grin of triumph that was more beast-like than human, as the essence of the outer god poured into the vessel he had prepared. The aftermath of that night left a permanent mark upon the landscape and the people of Dunwich. The violet light faded, leaving only a scorched and blackened circle upon the hilltop, where no grass would ever grow again. Lavinia was returned to the farmhouse, a changed creature. Her eyes, once merely pink, now held a depth of darkness that seemed to swallow the light, and her body began to swell with a growth that was unnaturally rapid and terrifyingly vibrant. The wizard, too, seemed to have aged a century in a single night, his strength failing even as his madness reached its zenith. He knew that the seed had been planted, that the bloodline of the Whateleys was now irrevocably entwined with the lineage of the stars. The village folk spoke in hushed tones of the Dunwich horror that was to come, though they knew not the half of what had truly transpired upon the hill. They saw only the outward signs, the strange, rhythmic thumping from the Whateley house, the way the whippoorwills never ceased their chanting, and the increasingly desperate efforts of the wizard to bar his doors and windows against the prying eyes of the world. They did not know of the twin entities growing within Lavinia, one who would bear the semblance of a man, and another more terrible brother, who would remain unseen, a monstrous shadow of the father who had sired them from the depths of the abyss. In this prequel to the ultimate tragedy of the Whateley family, we see the true nature of the horror that would eventually necessitate the intervention of Dr. Armitage and his colleagues from Miskatonic University. It was a horror born of human greed and spiritual bankruptcy, a manipulation of the desperate and the downtrodden by a mind that had long since surrendered its humanity to the cold, indifferent gods of the cosmos. Lavinia Whateley, the albino outcast, remains a figure of profound pathos, a woman who sought salvation in the arms of a monster, only to find that the gods of her father's dreams were but the harbingers of a night that has no end. The stones on Sentinel Hill remain to this day a silent testament to the night the veil was breached. They stand as a warning to those who would seek to peer too deeply into the secrets of the universe, for there are things in the dark places of the earth and in the spaces between the stars that are not meant for the eyes of men. The rite of the Whateleys was but a single chapter in a much longer and more terrible history, a history of a world that is but a fragile bubble floating upon an ocean of infinite squamous darkness. And in the silence of the Dunwich hills, when the wind moans through the stunted pines and the whippoorwills begin their rhythmic, expectant cry, one can almost hear the echoing footsteps of that which waits at the gate, ever vigilant, ever hungry, and ever patient for the next fool to turn the key. As the months progressed following the blasphemous union upon the hill, the Whateley farmhouse became a place of even more profound dread. The structure itself seemed to groan under the weight of the secret it harboured, its timbers warping as if trying to flee the presence within. Old Whateley, now nearly blind and prone to long fits of coughing that sounded like the rattling of dry bones, spent his remaining strength fortifying the upper floors. He spoke to no one but Lavinia, and his speech was a chaotic jumble of archaic English and the guttural sibilant tongue of the old ones. He was a man who had seen the face of his God and found it to be a mirror of his own withered soul. Lavinia, meanwhile, had retreated into a state of catatonic grace. She spent her days staring out the window toward Sentinel Hill, her hands resting upon the unnatural protrusion of her abdomen. She no longer felt the sting of the villagers' taunts. Their voices were but the buzzing of insects compared to the celestial music she now heard in the depths of her mind. She believed herself to be the mother of a new race, the queen of a world reborn in fire and shadow. Her father's manipulation had been so complete that she had come to cherish the very thing that was consuming her from within. The theft of the tomes, which had seemed a mere means to an end, now took on a new significance. The wizard understood that his time was short, and that the education of his grandson, the one who would bear the human form, was paramount. He pored over the stolen pages of the Necronomicon, transcribing the most potent spells into a shorthand that only one of the Whateley blood could decipher. He knew that the world would not sit idly by while the gate was opened, and he prepared his progeny for the inevitable conflict with the learned men of the valley and the university towns beyond. The construction of the stone circles had also served a secondary purpose, acting as a beacon for those other outsiders who dwelt in the hidden corners of the world. Strange figures were seen on the roads leading to Dunwich, men with the look of the sea about them, or those with features that suggested a lineage far older than the hills themselves. They came to pay homage to the wizard and to catch a glimpse of the woman who carried the seed of Yog-Sothoth. They were the acolytes of a shadow religion, the keepers of a flame that had been lit before the first man walked upright. The themes of poverty and ridicule that had defined Lavinia's early life were the soil in which this eldritch horror had grown. Had she been a woman of means, or had the community of Dunwich shown her the slightest shred of compassion, she might have resisted her father's dark enticements. But in the crushing weight of her isolation, the promises of a cosmic entity seemed far more real and far more kind than the cold charity of her neighbours. The wizard had played upon her resentment with the skill of a master musician, turning her bitterness into a weapon that would eventually strike at the very heart of the world. As the winter snows began to melt, signalling the approach of the birth, the atmosphere in the valley reached a fever pitch of unnatural activity. The earth tremors became more frequent, and the very water in the wells took on a bitter, metallic taste. The whippoorwills had returned in force, their numbers so vast that they blackened the trees around the farmhouse. They waited with a terrifying patience, their eyes fixed upon the windows of the upper room. They knew that a great soul, or a great horror, was about to enter the world, and they were ready to sing its arrival. The birth itself was an event of such singular terror that the wizard dared not record its details in his journals. There were screams that were not human, and a sound like the tearing of heavy silk. For a moment the farmhouse was bathed in that same violet light that had crowned Sentinel Hill, and a scent of musk and ancient dust filled the air. When the silence finally returned, two beings had been brought into the world. One was a child who, despite certain unsettling features, might pass for a man. The other was something else entirely, a formless, invisible thing that pulsed with the heartbeat of the outer voids. Old Whateley looked upon his handiwork and was satisfied. He had bridged the gulf. He had brought the outside in. He knew that his own life was forfeit, that the energies he had summoned would eventually consume him, but he did not care. He had achieved the impossible. He had given the gate a key of flesh and blood. Lavinia, exhausted and broken, looked upon her sons with a mixture of horror and a lingering, fanatical love. She was no longer the vessel. She was the mother of the apocalypse. The chronicle of the Sentinel Hill Rite thus concludes, serving as the dark prologue to the events that would later be known as the Dunwich Horror. It is a story of how the mundane miseries of human life can be transformed into the catalyst for cosmic catastrophe. It reminds us that the shadows in the hills are not merely the result of the setting sun, but are the footprints of beings who existed long before the sun was born and who will remain long after it has gutted out into cold grey ash. The Whateleys are gone now, their farmhouse a rotting ruin, and their name a curse whispered in the dark. But the gate they opened remains, a thin spot in the fabric of reality that shivers whenever the wind blows from the north. In the end, the story of the Whateleys is a cautionary tale of the dangers of seeking meaning in the void. It is a reminder that the universe is not only stranger than we imagine, but stranger than we can imagine, and that there are forces at work which view humanity with the same indifference that a man views the ants beneath his boots. The wizard, in his madness, thought he was a partner to the gods. Lavinia, in her loneliness, thought she was their beloved. Both were but pawns in a game whose rules are written in the stars and whose stakes are the very existence of the world. The hills of Dunwich remain brooding and silent under the watchful eyes of the whippoorwills. The stone circle on Sentinel Hill stands as a grim monument to a night of blasphemy, its stones still cold with the touch of the outside. And though the Whateley bloodline has been extinguished, the legacy of their rite lingers in the air, a faint rhythmic thrumming that can only be heard by those who have dared to look too long into the dark. For Yog-Sothoth is the gate, and Yog-Sothoth is the key, and the path he once trod through the womb of a mortal woman is a path that can never be truly closed. The dense, cloying fog that often rolls off the Miskatonic and settles in the hollows of Dunwich serves as a shroud for the lingering rot. It is said that on certain nights, when the moon is a mere sliver of silver in a sky of obsidian, one can still hear the voice of old Whateley chanting from the heights. It is a sound that carries on the wind, a low, guttural vibration that sets the teeth on edge and fills the heart with an inexplicable dread. The villagers, those few who remain in the decaying houses of the valley, bolt their doors and draw their shutters, for they know that the things the Whateleys invited into their world have not altogether departed. Lavinia's fate, after the birth of her monstrous offspring, is a matter of dark speculation. Some say she withered away like a flower touched by frost, her vitality drained by the entities she had nourished. Others whisper that she did not die, but was taken by her celestial saviour into the dimensions beyond, where she dwells as a queen of shadows in the courts of Yog-Sothoth. Whatever her end, her presence is still felt in the Whateley farmhouse, a lingering scent of lavender and ozone that haunts the ruined rooms. She remains the central figure of this tragedy, the manipulated outcast who became the bridge to the infinite. The stolen tomes, the Necronomicon and the others, were never fully recovered. Fragments of the wizard's transcriptions have surfaced over the years in the hands of occultists and madmen. Each piece a jagged shard of a mirror that reflects the face of the abyss. These texts continue to exert a malign influence, drawing the unwary into the same web of forbidden knowledge that ensnared the Whateleys. The library at Miskatonic University keeps its surviving copies under lock and key. But even there, in the heart of academia, the books are said to whisper to those who pass by their shelves. The construction of the stone circles on Sentinel Hill remains a mystery to archaeologists and historians alike. The stones, which bear no marks of any known tools, seem to have been shaped by a force that is not of this earth. They are arranged in a pattern that corresponds to no known astronomical system. Yet they possess a terrifying symmetry that suggests a profound and alien intelligence. They are a reminder that the history of the Earth is far longer and far darker than our textbooks suggest, and that there have been many who have sought to call back the old ones from their long sleep. In the final analysis, the Sentinel Hill Rite was not merely an act of sorcery. It was an act of cosmic rebellion. It was an attempt by a desperate and degenerate man to overturn the laws of nature and to place himself at the center of a new, chaotic order. That he failed is a mercy for which we should all be grateful. Yet the fact that he came so close to success is a sobering thought. It suggests that the walls of our reality are thinner than we would like to believe, and that the monsters of our nightmares are but a single incantation away from stepping into the light. The story of the Whateleys is a tale of the human condition when it is stripped of hope and dignity. It is a story of how the search for power and belonging can lead to the very gates of hell. And as the sun sets over the hills of Dunwich, casting long, distorted shadows across the valley, one cannot help but wonder how many other wizards are even now poring over ancient scrolls, and how many other Lavinias are waiting in the dark for a god who will never come. The horror of Dunwich is not a thing of the past. It is a lingering presence, a shadow that falls across the soul of anyone who dares to walk the lonely paths of the Miskatonic Valley. The whippoorwills continue their chant, their voices rising and falling in a rhythmic cadence that seems to echo the very heartbeat of the earth. They are the watchers, the chroniclers of the transition between life and death, and they know the secrets of Sentinel Hill better than any man. They sang for the wizard, they sang for Lavinia, and they will sing for the world when the time of the old ones finally returns. Until then, they wait in the shadows, their eyes bright with a knowledge that is as old as the stars and as cold as the void between them. The legacy of the Whateleys is a stain upon the earth that can never be fully washed away. It is a reminder of a time when the stars were right and the gate was opened, if only for a moment. And in that moment, the world was changed forever. The Dunwich horror was not just a monster in the woods. It was the manifestation of a cosmic truth that we are but a small and insignificant part of a universe that is vast, ancient, and utterly indifferent to our fate. The rite upon the hill was a cry into the dark, and the dark, as it always does, answered. As we conclude this story of those dark years, we are left with a sense of profound unease. The details of the preparation, the theft of the tomes, and the construction of the circles all point to a level of dedication and madness that is truly terrifying. But it is the human element, the manipulation of Lavinia, the poverty of the Whateleys, and the ridicule of the villagers that provides the most chilling insight into the nature of the horror. It is a horror that begins in the heart of man and ends in the cold, unfeeling reaches of the outer voids. And in the silence of the Dunwich Hills, the shadows continue to grow, waiting for the next dawn that may never come.